Being inspired by your drums is a huge motivator to practice and just to play in general. But lately, you're feeling like your drums aren't good enough or you need something more professional to really get by. But you also haven't changed your heads or your wires or your tuning in a really long time. Not only is the coating wearing off of your batter head, but your snare side head is stretched to the limit. You've even got a couple of bent wires down there. It's really easy to conflate worn out heads and wires with a bad drum. And surely some of you are saying, well, what do you guys know? You got all these nice drums here. They're all going to sound good. Today, we're going to flip the script. We are going to do a full glow up on one of my students' entry-level drums and show you exactly what you're missing. Now more than ever, we live in an instant gratification society, and inside of that, it makes sense to think that the quickest way to a new sounding drum is a new drum. Before you go down that rabbit hole, let's pause and consider what we can do with the drum that's directly in front of you. Let's give a listen to the drum that's directly in front of me. The first thing that we want to say is, if you dig the sound of this drum as it is right now, there's nothing wrong with you, and there's nothing wrong with this drum. It's the sound of a drum that has seen a lot of miles. I helped my student get this set of drums almost a decade ago, and I put this head on there, so I know exactly how old it is. I also know that every single lesson I ever taught him was on this head. Additionally, at the time, it was a relatively new drum, so we didn't swap out the snare side head, and lo and behold, it has the stock snare side head on it. Over the course of those 10 years, this batter head has been worn out in a variety of ways, from getting hit with sticks, to getting hit with hands, to even getting thrown in the back of a car for a recital. Over the course of that time, it's gotten tensioned up over and over and over again to try to retain some semblance of tone and articulation. This phenomenon is even more noticeable on the snare side head, which is cranked to the absolute max, to the point where we actually can't see the damage that's happened to that head. It's also worth noting that though the wires don't exhibit a strong visual issue, they have some differences in the tension between the wires that's both because they're not particularly nice wires, but also because they've been bumped into and set crooked on snare stands since he was 5 years old. With these heads being worn out and also stretched to the max, there's not a lot of tone there, but additionally, there was some wild behavior between the center and the edge of the batter head. Let's give a listen to some hits from the edge to the center and then back again. Some of what we're hearing is owed to the very stretching that's occurred right in the strike zone at the center of the drum. On a new drum head at a given tension, the collective tension all over the head is fairly even, but now we have a discrepancy between the playing zone and the rest of the head on the way to the edge. This results in a head that's both very difficult to tune and also one where if you leave that center zone even a little bit, things start to go haywire. The other fallout of all of this damage at the center screwing up the head's ability to resonate evenly is that if we want to play good center hits and not catch the rim, they're not going to be able to bloom at this high tension that we need to be at in order to have some tone. We're going to go ahead and replace the batter, the reso, and the snare wires. But before we do that, let's tune this drum down to a more medium range to really get into how damaged these heads are and how narrow its usable tuning range is. Once we get down here, it's virtually impossible to get a consonant sound out of this drum. The overtones and the sustain are crazy, and also it's somehow still choked sounding even though we've pitched it down toward a medium range. Now's the time. Let's take all this off and move on to fresh heads and wires. In the course of changing the heads and the wires out on this drum, I'm doing just a little bit of a wipe down with a cloth because it is fairly dusty. We have some other videos back in our archives that delve in deeper to how to clean and maintain the finish and the edges and all the other parts of the drum, and you can check those videos out. In case anyone's wondering why I'm taking both of the heads and the wires off the drum completely rather than swapping one head and then the other and then the wires, it's just to make sure I can get a good look at every part of the drum and also assess if there's any damage or any other things that I might need to know about that could affect our ability to get where we need to go. Both because we love them and because they are nice and middle of the road and simple, we are using a coated G1 batter, a Snare Side 300, and one of our favorite sets of snare wires, the Custom Pro Steels. The heads we chose for today are going to allow us a really broad tuning range, and they're very versatile, which means that we can get whatever sound we want once we start tuning the drum up. Fresh heads and wires are installed. Let's give this drum a listen at a medium tuning. Before anyone asks, we didn't aim for the exact same tuning as the medium tuning that we went with before we changed the heads. Rather, we're going for a certain kind of character of sound, and depending on the state that the heads are in, the tension they need to be under to get that could vary. Earlier with the old heads, when we went for the medium tuning, we weren't deliberately trying to make it sound bad. We were actually trying to see how good we could do under the circumstances. Likewise, here with the fresh heads and wires, we're going for the best sound that we can. If you don't hear the difference dramatically between the earlier and this example, that's okay, but we're going to talk about this anyway. With this pitch range and fresh heads, we have increased tone. We have better snare response. We have what perceives to me to be a louder, fuller, and bigger rim shot. We also have a usable center sound, which is a big deal for me because I don't always play rim shots. It's worth noting, again, that if you are a player who dominantly plays rim shots and rarely plays in the center of the drum, there's nothing wrong with that, but you may not readily hear the damage to your heads the way that someone that goes through different techniques might. Something that I personally want to mention that we were talking about earlier is that fresh heads and in-tune heads also allow you to explore extended techniques in a way that are much more pleasant to the ear and more inspiring to go down that path. Let's really zoom in on what we're gaining when we move to the fresh heads. Let's listen to a back-to-back comparison of the earlier medium tuning with the old heads and where we landed here. The differences to our ears are pretty dramatic, and they lie predominantly in how full and powerful the sound of the instrument is at the full dynamic range. Additionally, being able to have a really pure and single note come out of the drum rather than a lot of overtones and harmonics that are fighting each other ultimately results in a more pleasant sound for the ear. There are also a few things that you can't hear but that are very real when you're sitting down at a drum with fresh heads that's been tuned properly. The largest one for me is the feel of striking the drum. Striking a choked out drum feels stiff and has an uncomfortable kind of rebound to it that, depending on the player, can be really frustrating. I personally like a drum where when I strike it in the center, you can feel the stick sink in just a little bit and then give you a tremendous amount of feedback and throw the stick back up toward me. This is particularly evident when I loosen the snare wires a little bit and play a more rolly kind of thing on the drum, especially if the beat is primarily snare drum. In addition to the feel improving, it's very important to note that with fresh heads, the tuning itself becomes more stable. Keeping the drum in tune over the course of a practice session or a performance, that's crucial. In addition to that stability, if you decide to change the tuning, it's way easier to tune a fresh head, as evidenced by how fast we were able to get a great sound out of this one. If you're thinking about getting a new drum, surely you've realized that that is an investment. Changing the heads on the drum you have is also an investment, but albeit a much less expensive one. This is about a $70 investment in the drum that's in front of you to do both of the heads and the wires, but it'd be pretty difficult to get a new drum that was an upgrade from anything for that kind of money. The truth of the matter is that if you do end up getting a new drum, or even just a new to you used drum, you may end up replacing the batter head or both of the heads or the wires too on top of that new drum investment, and it's hard to know until it's already in your hands. Oftentimes, respecting an instrument and taking it really seriously seems to correlate with it being expensive or rare or the one that someone famous uses. I know more professional musicians out there working at the highest levels than you would believe who prefer inexpensive instruments that maybe they've modified a little bit, but ultimately get them the sound that they need without the burden of some expensive item they're going to worry about. For our money, the money that we have, and as professionals, this is a giggable drum. I would take this to a gig today. It sounds fantastic, and if I was hung up on that it says Catalina on the side of it or whatever brand, that would take away from me being able to just enjoy that it sounds great. The irony of the expensive instrument is that a person of a given skill level is really just going to sound like themselves no matter what instrument you put in their hands. So at the end of the day, practicing getting a great sound is just as important as practicing playing. If any of what you heard today reminds you of your drum, you're not alone. Just remember that with a little care and feeding, you can get an amazing sound out of whatever drum is sitting in front of you, as long as you take the time and try.